Hello everyone, this is Ryan Miles, Meraki Technical Solution Architect. Today I'm going to be talking about the Meraki MG Cellular Gateway, reviewing the models, features, and deployment designs. The purpose of this video is really to focus on the deployment designs much more than the models and the features, as those can all be found in the respective data sheets. But as a quick review, we have the MG21 and the 21E. The E models mean external antenna options. Those could be omnidirectional or directional patch antennas. The MG21 is a Cat6 LTE product. It has a single SIM slot for a single provider. It has two 1 gig ports. It can accept PoE. You can also power the MG through PoE ports either on some of the select MX products like the 85, 95, 105, but you can also power it from a PoE switch, an injector, or a regular wall type of adapter. The 41 and 41E provides dual SIM slot capability. There's still just a single radio, so only one carrier is going to be active at a given time, but this does offer redundancy. Should the primary SIM slot fail, it will automatically fail over to the secondary SIM slot. And this 41 also has a higher grade Cat18 cell modem. The latest product, which just started shipping, is the MG51, which has a 5 gig radio, which supports all the way up to 2 gig of capability. This also is a dual SIM slot product, and the Ethernet ports on this product also move from 1 gig up to 2.5 multi-gig capability. They, of course, will also operate at 1 gig if you don't have a multi-gig switch, but if you do have multi-gig, they will auto-negotiate up to 2.5. Quick summary of the MG is you can have up to 4 MGs in a network. There's no limit in the entire organization. There are some template limitations today, and I have linked to the details. Specifically, when the MG is in a template, it doesn't support DHCP range, reserved ranges, or fixed assignments, or DHCP reservations. That is a known limitation today. If you don't leverage templates, then you still have that capability. Also, it's important to note that the MG is a simple cellular gateway managed by the Meraki Cloud. It doesn't need to have other Meraki things in the network. It can be in front of a MX security appliance, but it can be in front of any other firewall, router, platform out there. It doesn't have any particular dependencies. And then, as I mentioned before, it can be powered through a broad variety of power sources. The default configuration and operating mode of the MG is in routed mode. So that means that the cellular radio side will have an IP address from the carrier, and then the MG will be acting as a simple NAT router, providing DHCP off of the LAN side. This screenshot shows an example of 4 MGs in a single network using /26 networks from a larger /24 subnet. The MG does also now support on the MG41 and 51 pass-through mode, which is a little bit more of a corner case, but that is supported. All right, so into some of the designs here. So this is the most simple MG design that you could start with. In all of these designs, if I'm showing a WAN port like this, WAN 1, with no particular connection, that implies that that is connected to the internet, broadband, private WAN, whatever it might be. Just assume WAN 1 already has internet connectivity. So in this case, I'm adding an MG to the secondary WAN port. Very simple. The MG will connect one of its Ethernet ports down to the WAN 2 Ethernet port of the MX, and the MG will be providing the DHCP address to the MX WAN 2 interface. And as I note here, that MG could be an MG 21, 41, or a 51. So if it's a 41 or a 51, that obviously means that it could support up to 2 providers. So even in a simple single MX and MG arrangement like this, you could essentially have three-way redundancy of you have your wired WAN provider on WAN 1, and if that fails, the MX can now start using the WAN 2 port out to the MG via SIM 1, and if SIM 1 or carrier 1 fails, it still then can fail over to carrier 2 on the secondary SIM slot. As mentioned before, the MGs do all models have 2 Ethernet ports on them. They are part of the same LAN. There's really no concepts of VLANs or anything like that on the MG. We do, by default, use port isolation on those ports as well. So when you connect 2 ports of the MG downstream, whether it's to separate devices that then are cross-connected, or even you connect both of the MG ports down to the same device, because of the port isolation that's happening on the MG, that will prevent any sort of loops from occurring. So in this slightly more redundant design, this shows an example of a HA pair of MXs, the primary on the left, the spare over on the right. And in this case, if WAN 1 on the primary MX fails, it would of course start using WAN 2 up to the MG, which of course could be dual or single SIM for resiliency there. If WAN 2 on the primary MX fails, then you of course will have a failover at the MX level over to the spare. And if that spare still has connectivity out to WAN 1, it would of course prefer that based on the default configuration if you're preferring WAN 1. But if WAN 1 has totally gone down and is still unavailable even on the MX failover, then of course the MX spare will use its WAN 2 up to the MG, which is still reachable and active. Notice in here, I'm not calling out any particular way that I'm powering the MG. So this could be an example where these MXs are something like an MX85, where WAN 2 does provide PoE. And in that case, this topology is accurate. Those MXs are powering the MG. If these are non-WAN PoE model MXs, or other sorts of firewalls, non-Meraki firewalls, then obviously you would be powering this MG through some other means, an injector, a wall adapter, or something else. The next design would be using a breakout switch. And in the case of this single MG-MX MS on the left, really the main benefit this is providing is showing how I am powering the MG via that PoE breakout switch. There could be larger reasons that you have breakout switches in front of your firewalls to break out your WAN 1 or your wired WAN providers as well, and I'll show some of those designs as we go through the kind of more complex designs here. You can of course incorporate this into a MXHA design again, to where the MG connects down to a switch, and then that switch connects down to both of the MXs. You could even connect both MG ports down to that switch for kind of layer 1 redundancy should for some reason someone disconnects one of the switch ports up to the MG, or there's a cable failure or something like that. You would have at least a physical layer of resiliency by dual connecting that MG down to that switch. Of course, in a single switch design like that, that single switch becomes a single point of failure, which I will address in some of the upcoming slides. This really steps through the most simplistic designs all the way to sort of the most robust and resilient designs as we go through here. All right, so this next one still leverages a single MG, but as you can see, it's now connected to both breakout switches. So there's path resiliency or redundancy. There's also redundancy from a PoE perspective. As long as those switches are providing PoE, you could be providing PoE on, say, switch number 1 up to the MG, and if switch 1 were to fail, the MG could still be powered off of switch 2. And in this case, you can see that the primary path for WAN 2 on the primary MX would be up through switch 1 and over to the MG. But I could have a failure, say right here, between switch 1 and the MG. WAN 2, as long as WAN 2 can still communicate through this switch, it could take this trunk across the switches and then still up to the MG. So MX primary would still be contacting the MG just through the other switch path. There's also pure cellular designs that can be done with the MG, of course. So this is a simple example of there is no broadband or private WAN available at a site, so an MX is going to connect to MGs on both the WAN 1 and the WAN 2 port. And again, because the MGs can provide or support single or dual SIM, that could potentially give you up to 4 cell carriers in a design like I'm showing here. And because the MX can load balance across those WAN ports, I could be load balancing traffic or based on layer 3 or layer 7 information, creating uplink selection policies and leveraging both WAN paths, both MGs at the same time. And then of course, if I lose either one of those MGs, those carriers, those pathways off the WAN ports, I'm gonna have built-in redundancy because the MX is gonna use the remaining WAN port that is available and operational. This can work into a redundant design where I have dual MX deployed and I land an MG on the WAN 2 port of each of these. So in this case, I have firewall or security appliance resiliency as well as redundancy from an MG perspective. With breakout switches, you get more path redundancy and PoE redundancy. So this is a more robust design showing dual firewalls, dual breakout switches, dual MGs. I've color-coded essentially the MG1, the MG2 VLANs here. So MG1 on the left is the primary, and it's able to communicate and derive PoE from the 2 breakout switches below. And in normal operating mode, my MX primary, if it is using WAN 2, it's going to go up to switch 1 and then up to MX1. And again, if I was to like lose the link between MG1 and switch 1, as long as switch 1 is still up, I have that trunk path across to the other switch. And that switch is also still connected back to MG1, so MG1 would be powered and there'd still be a data pathway to it. These breakout switches, those could be a switch stack, or they could be just more traditional switches connected together via front-facing ports. I left that sort of agnostic in here because it doesn't necessarily matter in the overall design and functionality that we're talking about. A pure cellular, even more robust design is landing MGs on all of the WAN ports in an MX HA design. So in this case, you could lose, up to 3 MGs, you could lose up to 1 MX, and you would still have a pathway out as last resort on, say, the MX spare and MG number 4 all the way on the far right. And because these can be dual SIM again, you could potentially have up to 8 cell providers in a design like this. With breakout switches, it gives you a little more visibility and control from a traffic perspective, and it gives you some additional layers of resiliency from a failover perspective. Again, I've color-coded the VLANs. These are just layer 2 VLANs. They're not routed in any way. Like I said, there's no concept of VLANs on the MG. So in this design, it's something as simple as on the breakout switches, just having the ports, like in the green links, be in, say, VLAN 900, and then the blue ports are VLAN 901, and so on. Just layer 2 VLANs, because there's no awareness of VLANs on the MG, and the MX WAN ports also don't care about the VLANs. They're just routed ports. So these breakout switches are literally just layer 2 transport. And then through to a super redundant design here of MXHA breakout switches cross-connected together and all MGs dual connected to the switches below. And in this most robust design, you can see that you can lose any pathway, any MX, any breakout switch, any MG on here, and you have up to 8-way cellular provider redundancy, as well as tons of path resiliency and PoE resiliency in this design. Thanks for listening. Hopefully that gave some more context to these slides. If there's any questions, shoot me an email at rymiles@cisco.com.